Two friends meet up to drink some beers and talk about past times. Not yesterday, but long ago, it's scandals, wars and crimes. From Stalin's reign to Prohibition, Tudors, Pompey, Bush and NASA's mission, Edison's bulk, Genghis Khan's rise to victory. Forget your old teacher, it's time for Pint-Sized History.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pint-Sized History podcast. I'm Zach.
And I'm Joe.
And as you'll be very familiar with by now, this is the podcast we talk through the historical events, landmarks, people, things that have happened in the past that have shaped the world we live in today. That's the hook. Yep. That's what it's supposed to be about. It rarely is actually about that.
But today it actually is.
Oh, it is?
Today,
it is today?
It actually is. No, it definitely is today because, as you will have read from the title, we're going to be talking about, to be honest, I'd kind of forgotten that this was a piece of history, at least in the sense of like as a subject for us to do. Obviously, we know what it is. But as a subject, we don't really, we've never considered doing this properly. We've never said to each other, oh, when are we going to do the atomic bombings and stuff? So we've never really talked about it that much.
It's probably because I always do Asia and you never do Asia.
We love World War II. Our audience loves World War II. And Zach just does all the World War II ones. He's got like double the World War II ones that I've got. So I thought, screw it, let's jump in and do a hot topic from World War II. And also, like I say, this is something that's really very, very, very important to humanity and the global history of humanity. What happens that we'll be talking about today is really important.
I guess you did sort of talk about it. I remember in the beginning of the Cuban Missile Crisis episode,
you
did slightly talk about it because you were trying to give a comparison of like thermonuclear war and how that might end up, and you used Nagasaki, Fat Man, and Little Man and Fat Boy as a Fat Man and Little Boy. Those are the names of the two bombs, right? If it wasn't obvious, we're talking about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II.
I can read the title, Zach.
Well, they may not have done it. Some people might just love us so much they click fucking play. They don't care what we're doing. They give a shit what episode it is. They go, fuck, that sounds good. Yeah, let's go right forward.
Fuck yeah, with their faces. I like their faces. Just click on it straight away. Yeah, no, look, you're right. We did actually talk about it very briefly during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a long time ago now. We did that podcast right at the beginning. So what would that be? I'd guess around September or October 2024. So a long time. And I got to say, I love talking about nuclear stuff because it's so visceral, so important, and so dark as well. And I feel like it doesn't get discussed enough how dangerous the world we live in today is. And I'm also a ghoul. That's a weird insult to go.
You look
there.
like a ghoul.
I look like a ghoul. Okay, yeah. You're bringing it hot straight away. I mean, that's really top quality flaming there. You really got me.
Do you get upset? Do you get upset when I call you pasty and white? Is that
no? I embrace my paleness. I just think there's a time and a place, and we're about to talk about hundreds of thousands of people being incinerated. So you referring to me as a ghoul?
Don't do that. Don't do that.
I think it's a little bit unfair. Yeah, it's the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I was a bit surprised when I thought about doing it for this pod that I hadn't really considered it before, because the Cuban Missile Crisis was the second one I did. First one was D-Day, Cuban Missile Crisis was second, and I haven't done anything about nuclear war or nuclear weapons since. I've done a ton of research, and we're going to do a big two-parter about what happened in 1945.
And welcome back to our second edition of the weekly releases of the podcast, and I hope you're enjoying having one after the other. It's a lot of fun for us, and plenty to cover, plenty of work and research for us to do. And if you do enjoy what we're doing, please remember to like, subscribe, and follow, and review us 5 stars.
Nice. That was nicely segued. Yeah, it's true. This is the 6th episode in a row that we've had, because 3 Rome, 2 of Saddam Hussein, and now this one as well. We've got 6 in a row, just back to back, so people can just enjoy listening to our voices all the time. I hope they're not sick of us. So this is obviously an incredibly important topic. The primary reason being that this is the only time that nuclear weapons have been used in war. And they've been tested a whole bunch by a lot of different countries, and a lot of different times in the last, 80 years or so. But this is the only time that they were actually used against a people, against a civilization. And we all know the names. I'm not just saying to you, but to many people. Could you name me anything about the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, apart from the bombings? Could you name me anything? Everyone knows their names. They're extremely famous city names. And yet, could you actually tell me anything else about those cities except for the fact that they were one of the bomb sites?
Well, I know Nagasaki is on the western coast of Japan. It's on the leftmost island.
I'm not asking where it is geographically. I'm asking, tell me something about the city.
So Hiroshima was supposed to be like an industrial base, I think, was the reason why it was targeted for its bombings.
But that's what I mean. That's to do with the bombings. That's not something else.
What do you know about Doncaster?
The fuck
exactly.
Are you talking
can't just pick a random place in the world and go, what do you know about that? What do you know? What do you know about Krakow?
What are you talking about?
What do you mean?
You're waffling. I'm just pointing out that Nagasaki and Hiroshima are household names in every single part of the world, and yet there's actually nothing particularly known about their cities except for the fact that they had one of the most consequential moments ever happening in the centre of their cities. That's just the point I'm making.
What do you know about
There's
Dresden?
Not much to it.
It's a better one. What do you know about Dresden?
Well, the only things I know about Dresden is the fact that the British firebombed them and that it was a really beautiful city and we completely fucked it up. But again, Dresden's a good example of that. It's another city that really I don't know much about except for the fact that what happened.
I think that's a slightly nothing statement. I don't want to be rude to you, Joe, because I adore you. Of course, you're not going to know anything about some of the places that, like, historically are significant. The reason why they're significant is because historically significant things have happened there.
There's not much to what I'm saying. I'm just pointing out that Hiroshima and Nagasaki are two of the most famous of cities in the world, despite the fact that there's only one thing that we know that's happened to them, and that's because that thing is so important.
What do you know about Pearl Harbor? What do you know about Midway? Would you know?
Midway's not a place.
Huh?
Midway's
an island. It's an
It's like
island.
A tiny island.
Yeah,
but they didn't even fire Midway.
About it?
Okay. You're wasting time already about something that's already. All I wanted was for you to say, yeah. Fair play, Joe. What have you got for us next?
Sorry,
what's your next nugget of wisdom?
When has it ever been that easy?
Where's your next pearl that you're going to come out with? I'm waiting for you to say that. So, instead of you going, that is so stupid. What is the point of you saying that? It's not, obviously, there's not much to it. I'm just pointing out something about just about how famous they are as places. Everyone knows about them, and everyone also knows about the Manhattan Project, especially in the last few years because of Oppenheimer movie. We got a bit of a deep dive into how all that works. So if you watch the movie Oppenheimer, then you know about how the atomic bomb was first developed and how it all came about.
So this isn't going to be Manhattan Project. This is going to be the war, the decision to bomb Hiroshima and Nagasaki, what it looked like on the ground, the after effects of it.
Both. I mean, look, I've actually got written down the exact list of things that we're going to be discussing, so I can literally just say them to you. But we will be discussing the Manhattan Project because you have to discuss it. I'm just saying that the name of the episode is about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that is the focus because it's the consequences of it that are so interesting. So we're going to be talking about all of it. I mean, we're going to be talking about the Manhattan Project itself and the desire to create a new weapon. We're going to be talking about this exact moment in history in 1945 and the stakes at play with all these different nations. We're going to be discussing the decision of which city they choose and whether they actually should use the weapon at all. We're then going to discuss the hour-by-hour account of how the day went for both those occasions. And finally, of course, we'll talk about the ramifications and whether it was justified and all that stuff. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's pod. So the Manhattan Project is going to be part of it, but it's part of the story. It's not the story. This isn't an episode about Oppenheimer himself.
It's interesting how you mentioned it's the only time a nuclear bomb has ever been used in history. Because that is
a nuclear bomb has been used in war against another civilization. That's what I said.
Yeah, well, it's the only time a nuclear bomb has been used in history.
Well, no, I was saying that to differentiate between testing.
Yeah,
million bombs have been tested.
Used.
But not just like testing,
That's
but
so
like
pedantic.
as a showcase. Fucking hell, are you serious? Firstly, I said it 10 minutes ago. Why are you bringing it back now?
Okay. The point is that it's frequently a crux used by people who criticize America and Israel for launching preemptive strikes against Iran. It's like they're saying, like, we don't trust Iran, we don't trust North Korea with a nuke, we don't trust any of these countries who potentially want a nuclear weapon to have a nuke, yet the only person who's used a nuke in the past has been the United States, who are the world police on this subject.
Yeah.
I'm not saying whether it's a correct or false thought. I think it's an interesting discussion to be had, but I think it is ironic, isn't it, that you're stopping everyone else from using a nuclear weapon, yet you are the only person that's used it before in the past.
Yeah.
I just think it's quite relevant, isn't it?
It is. I think this story itself is incredibly relevant, and I agree with everything you said. And I think that what you just said will be a better discussion once we've gone through everything that we're going to talk about today. I would save most of that stuff for near the end because I agree. There's a whole lot to it that you can then take to the modern day, and you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, if the Americans were the only ones that's used it, then can they pull the ladder up from behind them and say no one else has allowed them or can use them again in the future?
They did to us, didn't they? They tried to stop us from having a nuclear weapon.
They tried to stop us from having a bunch of things. The Americans stopped the Brits from being a global power after World War II. But we'll talk about all of that down the line. But to tell the story of these bombings, we first need to have a quick recap of where we're at in World War II. So we've done so many of these World War II episodes that you can just click between the eps to figure out exactly where we are.
That's
but in case
we're very lazy, let them do our work for us.
Yeah. Wait, what would you start with?
We start with
the Nazi rise. Start with the Nazi rise.
Stalingrad.
Then do Battle of Britain. Then get to Stalingrad. I didn't put Pearl Harbor as well. That was important. I will briefly explain that World War II at this point has been raging for a few years, and on many fronts. I mean, that's the thing about a world war is that it's in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa, Pacific Islands. It is in full swing. And the Americans have just been attacked at Pearl Harbor. So now they are actually joining the fighting themselves. You know, they've been in amongst it in every way except actually fighting, and now they're actually involved fighting as well. Previously, Albert Einstein, along with physicist Leo Szilard, had written a letter. President Franklin D. Don't you fucking start trying to correct my pronunciation.
No. I'm just saying like lizard. It's lizard, more like lizard, as the lizards around the world.
Is that a Jewish joke? What are you doing there?
No, it's not a Jewish joke. What the fuck, man?
Einstein's Jewish.
No,
and I presume Lizard is as well.
It's like David Icke or something. I can't remember his name. He's a conspiracy theorist from Britain who thinks that the world is run by lizard people.
I mean, Mark Zuckerberg does give big lizard vibes.
Yeah, incredibly lizard person vibes.
Lizard and Einstein. The two of them are writing a letter to Franklin D. Roosevelt. Their letter explained that they have this theory that a huge chain reaction explosion could create a new type of bomb purely by splitting uranium. And most importantly, the letter pointed out that Nazi Germany had just halted the sale of uranium in Czechoslovakia, which implied that they were planning to use uranium in some sort of their own program. And the point Einstein's trying to make is, look, I don't want there to be an extremely dangerous bomb. But the fact of the matter is that if it's going to be created at some point in human history. It doesn't matter if it's now or if it's in 10 years or 5 years or in 50 years. But if it's going to happen eventually, I would much, much rather the people that aren't megalomaniac, fascist, awful, anti-Semite, anti-every race except for Aryan scum to be the ones that get there first, because that would be it would be really dangerous for the rest of the world if that would happen. So he sends a letter to Roosevelt explaining this thing. But that was in 1939, and it's only in 1942, so 3 years after that letter, with the war in full swing for the Americans, that Roosevelt authorizes the Manhattan Project. I'm sure if you've seen Oppenheimer, then you know a bit about what exactly happens. Basically, for 4 years, the US government authorizes 130,000 people to work together, many of these people in these brand new, completely top secret cities, constructing this project. The most famous of these cities, Los Alamos in New Mexico. No one, literally no one of those 130,000 people knew the full scope of the project, except for maybe around 5-6 people. 2 of those people were Major General Leslie Groves, who was directing the entire project, and the nuclear physicist, who Matt Damon plays in the movie, and the nuclear physicist Robert Oppenheimer, who Cillian Murphy plays, and the whole movie is about. They understood the situation. But everyone else, or mostly everyone else, only understood a little bit, only had an idea, but they weren't told the full picture. The USA pumped $2 billion into the program, which is around $28 billion today. And hundreds of babies, because these are cities, they bring their families along. So hundreds of babies were born to the exact same address, a fake one that they created to hide the whereabouts of the actual cities where these kids were being born. So yeah, so you've literally only got a handful of people that know about this. Those 2 men, a few more of the really top generals in the US military, Roosevelt obviously, and Winston Churchill was also another person who had complete understanding of what was happening. He was given constant updates.
Is that because there was so many British scientists working on the bomb? Yeah,
so the Manhattan Project was, although it was an American-led project, it had a lot of help from Canada and Britain. And actually, the Americans were unwilling to drop the bomb unless they got the United Kingdom's consent, which implies that the United Kingdom was very much a big part of what they were doing, that everything they had was on the same page. Yeah, I think it's that Churchill, Einstein, and Roosevelt needed to be involved in all of this stuff and needed to be able to coordinate and help in any way they could, even if they were across the Atlantic. So in 1945, the bomb is ready for its first test. Do you remember the name of the test?
Yeah, Trinity Project.
The Trinity test. In the meantime, World War II rages on for the Americans. So now we're going to talk about Japan. And I'm sure this is where Zach's going to jump in a few times because he loves chatting about Imperial Japan.
Could you just ask me to do it?
I could, but I won't. Instead, I will come to you a few times. But first, let's just lay it on thick. Japan fucked up. They fucked up big time because they've gone all imperial. They've started committing a ton of war crimes in Korea and China. They think they're Billy Big Bollocks. They're taking all the islands, and then they decide to attack the biggest, most industrialized nation the world had ever seen, and thought if they surprise attack them, then they'll be fine. But of course, that is absolutely not what happens. Now, Imperial Japan was a very intense culture. They had a huge ultra-nationalist spirit, along with a very strong modernized military, which combined with their samurai spirit, which is known as...
Fuck, what the words leaving me. It's Bushido.
Yeah, Bushido. This ultra-nationalist culture believed three really important things. Firstly, that the emperor was a direct descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu. Emperor Hirohito was a living deity. That was one of their beliefs. They also believed that Imperial Japan was sacred and that no nation came close to their worthiness, which is why when they dealt with enemies like in Korea and China, they dealt with them with such contempt and committed some of the worst atrocities that you'll hear about in World War II, and that's saying a lot. And finally, they believed in pure military honor. They were a race descended from samurai, which meant that surrender was the ultimate dishonor, and the Japanese military firmly believed in fighting to the death, making the Pacific Front extremely horrible to fight on, which Zach has explained several times now in his two-parter on Iwo Jima and also the Pearl Harbor episode as well. Have you done any other Japanese Imperial Japan ones?
I feel like I have.
Manchuria, you didn't do that, did you?
No, it does feel like I've done more than that.
So those are the three things, right? Those three things mean that Japan fights with a huge ferocity and a huge stubbornness, especially the closer the Americans get to mainland Japan. So from the moment the Americans join the war after their attack at Pearl Harbor, they have to island hop, island by island, until eventually they're getting really close to Japan. And by 1945, they've only got the last few main islands to capture before they're able to get onto the main place. I mean, Okinawa is like the last vestige, I guess, for Japan. It's their last defense before they have to start defending the mainland. And so they defend it really, really bloodily because they're terrified that once, and this is the same for the Americans. The Americans are terrified of going to Japan itself because if they're fighting this bloody in Okinawa, then imagine how awful and how brutal it would be if they actually tried to land on the main Japanese islands.
Yeah, and the Japanese people have been like brainwashed as well at this time in history. So you have the Okinawans who have been propagandized by the Japanese Ministry of Propaganda to think that the US are going to come and kill them and rape the women and stuff like that. And they just commit suicide en masse. And there are literal videos of you see Okinawan women with their babies jumping off cliffs. The closer the Americans come, the harder they fight and the more conviction they have in their ideals.
Yeah, the suicide stories that come out of Japan in that time period are just really, really horrible. You get some really tough situations where, the citizens are just as brainwashed as the soldiers and the soldiers are just as brainwashed as some of the generals. I mean, some of the generals are fucking mad, as we'll talk about a little bit later on. So
it's always easy to say someone's brainwashed, isn't it, when they're the loser in war, because inherently history is written by the victors, so it's very easy for us to sit there and say they're brainwashed, but I guess objectivity.
How profound, dude. Holy shit, fucking hell.
Objectivity's got to prevail
like 10 minutes in and you're cooking here. Here we go. This is what I was looking for.
It's like a meme of Jay-Z riding in the flames.
Yeah, it's easy when you're the victor.
No, I it's a thing I struggle with a lot because I mean,
you said brainwash first, by the way. You said it initially.
But I said propagandized, not brainwashed.
No, you said brainwashed. I heard you say it.
No, I said propagandized. Roll the tape back.
Roll the tape.
Yeah, and the Japanese people have been brainwashed as well at this time in history.
Brainwashed. No, look, I actually agree. I think that many of the time when we use the word brainwash too easily, I don't think it's very fair a lot of the time. I will say though, for Imperial Japan, I think it's kind of fair. Obviously, look, let's put it this way: it's obviously not the whole people. Many people, like with many cultures, just kind of hide away, don't speak out towards the government, and just live on with their lives and hope that things, and they don't particularly care about Bushido spirit or suicide or whatever, or dishonor, none of that. But the reality is that especially in the military, they were completely fanaticalized. Is that the word?
Radicalized, probably the better word.
Yeah, radicalized. And I don't think they are totally brainwashed, of course not. But I do think that considering some of the really horrible atrocities that they committed, I don't think a normal people would do something like that. I think any population that starts committing things like the rape of Nanking are probably a little bit brainwashed into believing what they believe.
Yeah, not playing devil's advocate again, but that does come back to the idea of the banality of evil, doesn't it? Which was discussed with the Eichmann trial. It's can ordinary people commit horrendous acts? And psychologists tend to believe that based on different extenuating circumstances they can. So, yeah. Just drawing a comparison again,
I like it. I prefer this way better to at the start of the podcast when you're going, actually, you can't say that.
I think I'd like us as a podcast to step away from calling people brainwashed or radicalized, because I think there are times when it's overt and it's clear, but history.
But you don't think this one's clear?
I don't think it's inherently clear that the Japanese public are brainwashed into being super militaristic. Potentially, but like there's conscription, isn't there? So like there is a vast majority of people like us who are like young 20-year-old men who aren't particularly brainwashed, but just have to go to war, and then often the spirit commanders will be telling them you have to do this, and there's a huge shame culture in Japan. So like if they don't do it, then they're gonna bring shame and dishonor. So like I think there are times we've used brainwashing, like when we're talking about a North Korean public, which I think even then I still think it's tricky because it's not that they're brainwashed; they're probably just living in a terror state. But we get too bogged down. I just think it's important for us to steer clear of our own subjective interpretation of whether someone is brainwashed or not.
No, I like the conversation. I agree. I think you're probably right.
It takes away the historical validity if you're just going. It feels too emotional, is what I'm trying to say. Whereas, like, we want to lead with the facts and the objective nature of history, rather than our defined subjective terms of like, these are the baddies, these are the evil brainwashed baddies. It's not totally fair.
Okay. I agree. I agree with almost everything you're saying, but I will say, if you are to talk about any radicalization, I do think talking about the Imperial Army's standards and how they taught their soldiers and tried to teach their population. I mean, they believed that their leader was a god. I don't really think you can get more.
I haven't done enough research, but I guess like
no, they did. I'm telling you, they believed he was a god. And I'll tell you another thing. And I was going to say this for the end because it's one of the last things to talk about, but I'm happy to say it now. They had never heard his voice. People of Japan never even heard Hirohito's voice until the end of the war, when he went on a microphone and said that they'd surrendered. To them, the Japanese, Hirohito tried his best to, as with all the emperors, to disassociate themselves so much with the public so that they were on such a pedestal. They were so much higher than everyone else. That everyone would die for them. Now, I agree that we maybe shouldn't use the words brainwashing so much, but I will say, if you're going to talk about a people and what they believe, that does sound a lot like the North Koreans and how they treat the Kim family. And I do think North Korea is one of the better examples we can say of people that are, at least in some capacity, not all the time, but some capacity, brainwashed to some extent.
Yeah, this is why we need actual historians on the podcast sometimes. They can tell us as if the Japanese were actually brainwashed or not. But,
I agree with you that brainwashed is probably the wrong word, but I do think that radicalization of the Japanese is a fair thing to say. Anyway, let's keep going, because that was a long discussion. Despite all this stuff that I've said about the Japanese and how they felt, the fact was that, in reality, they were actually having a conversation about surrendering. They were really starting to lose the war badly. They knew they were losing the war badly. And most of the country, the population, were really demoralized and at this point did not believe that the war could be won. But the Japanese military, unlike some of the high command politicians and the public, they had zero intention of surrendering. And although Emperor Hirohito could just make the decision himself, he refuses to get involved. So the war must go on, and the American high command is having some issues of its own. President Franklin D. Roosevelt has just won his 4th term as President of the United States. It's after Roosevelt that they enact the 22nd Amendment, which removes the ability to be able to go for longer than 2 terms. But the problem for Roosevelt, and this is part of the reason why they add the amendment, is that he's gravely ill. And often it was his wife Eleanor who would be his eyes and his ears. In April 1945, Roosevelt died, and suddenly one of the biggest decisions in world history was left at the feet of his relatively inexperienced vice president. So Harry Truman was born in 1884 in Missouri. He has just been elected vice president to serve Roosevelt for Roosevelt's 4th term. He was not vice president for the other 3 terms. Incredibly, as a senator in 1944, he had noticed a huge discrepancy in the US defense budget. Millions of dollars being poured into some secret project. Truman found this. So he inquired into what it was. He was quickly told to drop the investigation immediately for the sake of national security. Even as he began his vice presidency in 1945, he served the first few months without any idea about the Manhattan Project. But suddenly, Roosevelt dies, and only 4 months into being vice president, Truman becomes president of the USA. So Truman is finally brought into the fold and explained that in secret the USA has created and tested an atomic bomb in the deserts of New Mexico. At the same time, his Pacific Fleet generals, which including General MacArthur. Who we've spoken about before, are are informing him that to invade mainland Japan would require the biggest amphibious landing ever, far larger than D-Day, and that if it was successful, the USA would still likely lose 250 to 1 million US soldiers, along with millions of Japanese fatalities. This mission would be called Operation Downfall, and Truman did authorize its preparation. So they are setting up for the Americans to invade the mainland of Japan through an amphibious landing.
Yeah, I can't imagine how horrible that invasion would have been. I'm sure you have us penciled in to discuss like the justification for a nuclear bomb being used against like the eventual invasion of the home islands. Yeah, it's hard to look at the actual scale of what that would have looked like and thought.
Yeah.
Vaporizing 100,000 people wouldn't be the better option.
Yeah, well, you're right. We obviously will discuss that a bit later. You know, we imagine D-Day as this, like, ridiculous feat, you know, the largest amphibious landing ever, one of the most dramatic moments in world history, and yet this would dwarf it. Like, that's how big a deal this would be. And it's only happening 1 year after D-Day itself. So to the idea of how it could go, I mean, imagine it goes as a disaster. I mean, Truman could get, you know, voted no confidence out of office if the landings invade terribly, millions of Americans die, and they're nowhere closer to stopping the Japanese, and the Japanese are fighting still as ferociously. Like, you know, it's a very tough decision to make. But regardless, he is planning for that eventuality when he then finds out that there's also this other option that they could take. There's one last piece to the jigsaw, however, for Truman, one important thing that we haven't factored in. Do you know what it is?
To the use of atomic weapons.
To either using a bomb or Operation Downfall of invading. There's one very important factor that we haven't really mentioned at all up to this point.
Yes, I know what it is. The Russians have just invaded Manchuria.
No, I mean, that's on the horizon.
Germany has surrendered.
No. I mean, you've got it. It's the Soviets.
Oh,
the fact
fine,
is, you're there. I mean, you're just skipping ahead a tiny bit, but you're absolutely right. So the final piece of the jigsaw is that Imperial Japan is not the only enemy. Now, technically, they're in an alliance, as is Britain, in an alliance with the Soviet Union. But the Germans have just surrendered. We know what the future is about to happen. And the idea of a Cold War between the democracies of the West and the communist Soviet Union is looming. So if this is the weapon of the future, if this is the future of warfare, then to brandish it as a benchmark of force to, you know, Joseph Stalin and the Soviets could also be beneficial. On top of it, the Soviets have agreed to get involved in Japan and are now on their way to the border to invade Manchuria and attack the Imperial Japanese themselves. Now, on paper, that sounds great because you go, great, well, finally Japan will lose because they've got both coming in at the same time. But because the Cold War is about to begin, they're terrified because they don't want Japan falling into the Soviet sphere of influence rather than the American sphere of influence. All those factors are all coming into play at the same... I mean, this is all like within a week, you know, of all these factors just coming in together, and he's got to make a call on it.
What crucial outpost of like American democracy and influence as well Japan is to them.
Yeah, it's so important. Such an important...
And South Korea too, obviously, but like Japan is like perfectly situated. It is providing cover for the Americans between China and Russia on the west coast of America and the east coast of those countries against them, basically.
Yeah, well, and not just that, but we'll actually talk about that in depth in the next episode when we discuss the ramifications, what happens at the end. But you're pretty much exactly right. It's like Japan ends up becoming such an important player on the global stage that if it had gone to the Soviets rather than the Americans, then the world we live in right now could be really, really, really different. Maybe their Cold War could have gone hot at some point because the Soviets had control of a piece of this like diplomatic jigsaw puzzle that before didn't give them the edge. So yeah, it's really interesting how things could have turned out if it had gone a slightly different way. But like I say, we'll talk about that in the next episode. So Truman's got all these decisions that he has to make, and so he finally prepares an ultimatum for Japan. He said, and this is a quote from Harry Truman, he said, "We call upon the government of Japan to proclaim now the unconditional surrender of all Japanese armed forces. The alternative for Japan, prompt and utter destruction." So he's given the ultimatum.
A whole civilization will die tonight.
There's another Truman quote later, which is like exactly like that. So it's even worse.
Really?
It's actually crazy. Yeah. We talked about setting the stage. So now we're up to the point where, you know, a decision has to be made. But before we talk about what happens, let's explain what exactly takes place when an atomic bomb goes off. Basically, with these atomic bombs, uranium-235 crashes into each other, creating a nuclear fusion chain reaction. This force detonates into a humongous fireball, climbing 100 meters or so until it eventually forms into the mushroom cloud that we all know. Before that, though, there is a blinding flash of light and a fireball hotter than the surface of the sun. Within 1 to 2 kilometers, people are vaporized, and the fire burns for days afterwards. The following blast, the blast wave, creates wind speeds of 280 meters a second, as the shockwave flattens wooden structures and crushes buildings. Radiation flies through the surrounding areas, giving those that were unfortunate enough to survive the blast acute radiation sickness. Now, the symptoms of radiation sickness are things like hair loss, violent vomiting, bleeding from the skin and the gums as well, and severe fatigue. And please bear in mind, this is the very first atomic bomb that I've just described how it works. Within 9 years, the Americans would create the first hydrogen bomb, which was already 1,000 times stronger than the atomic bombs dropped on Japan in 1945. Nuclear weapons nowadays are much less powerful than 1,000 times, but I guess they're much more effective as well. I guess they actually do the damage where they actually want the damage to go, rather than... Because a lot of these very early bombs don't actually do exactly what they were planned to do. That's why there was so much data that they wanted to collect around them to make sure that they were getting things right for the next time and improving how they made them. But anyway, that's how atomic bombs work. That's the situation that Truman has to realize if he's going to use that type of warfare or not. I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, but please stay with me, because I personally feel that this is some of the most important conversations that we all need to have cemented in our brains when we think about this type of stuff. Weapons define human history. Technology, even more so, defines human history. The discovery of fire is what set us apart from other primates. It allowed the cooking of food, it increased the size of our brains, it increased our energy intake by tons. It provided protection from predators, and it gave us the ability to create tools for the first time. The first humans who discovered the ability to meld fire to make weapons beat the other human species that couldn't make them in time. And this is key to understanding civilization. The race to build better and better equipment is what defines the world that we live in today. The tools that you make before your adversary means that you win the game of life. So the first tribes that use bronze beat those using copper. The first society to build the wheel could transport their weapons to the front line of whatever skirmish they were having faster. The Macedonians built the long spear, the phalanx, and combined with the strategy of Alexander the Great, they beat the biggest empire the world had ever seen. The Chinese invented gunpowder, suddenly ending centuries where castles were king. Nothing beat a castle. But yet suddenly the Chinese come up with this invention of gunpowder, and suddenly castles are irrelevant, and the world changes once again. The British were the first to the Industrial Revolution, and they reached that finish line in a victory that was so important that we created the biggest empire ever known off the back of it. So now, in 1945...
of the British Empire.
Exactly. So now, in 1945, the Americans recognise that this is the next big invention. A weapon easily capable of wiping a civilization off the map. This, in a way, felt like the endgame. Like all the previous inventions and weapons paved the way to this moment. You could argue that the Trinity test, which was the first explosion of a nuclear weapon in the deserts of New Mexico, it's as big or as transformative a moment in human history as the discovery of fire or the agricultural revolution, because this changes the game so much. And we can take this further. We can take this into the current day. In fact, if we're literally talking about the last few months, even just the last few weeks, we have seen major changes in the war in Ukraine. Ukraine have created a new breed of drone warfare that are so effective, especially at long distances. And for the very first time, Russia cannot replace soldiers in their army as fast as they're dying. These drones are so high quality and so long distance that they can now reach 70% of the Russian population, including Moscow. So,
and their oil refineries.
So, if that had been Russia rather than Ukraine, then right now we would be in a really different situation. But the fact is, it was a race to get to something first, and the Ukrainians have got there first, and right now they have a serious leg up, literally right now as I'm speaking.
But by necessity as well. drone warfare is it's the most economical form of warfare right now. It's like the Brazilian jiu-jitsu of warfare. Like if you're a smaller guy taking on a bigger person.
I'm really glad you said the word necessity, because that's kind of crucial to what I'm talking about. Innovation is literally when it's needed. This is what brings all these things. The necessity to have it is what drives all. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, you can probably guess if you know much about racing, especially in the Cold War, the next big thing was the space race. In the 1960s, they started to believe that actually maybe their best chance between the Soviets and the Americans of beating each other was for one of them to get to space first. Maybe if they got to space, they could find some material or find some edge to their competition, which could mean they could finally win the war. So they both, I mean, think about it, that's one of the greatest achievements ever in human history, is man setting foot on the moon. And that only happened because the necessity of making sure that the Americans or the Soviets beat each other. They cared so much about winning this ideological war between communism and capitalism, that they put people onto the moon. Something that, in retrospect, actually did nothing to change the Cold War. Landing on the moon in 1969 didn't do anything to change their fortunes. It's only now that we now have the technology to actually make something of our time in space, which is why, obviously, we had the thing that happened to the dark side of the moon the other
we're in
week.
a new space race, and it's a capitalist corporate space race.
Yeah, and that's what's so dark about it. It's not a cool space race like the Cold War space race.
It's horrible and soul sucking.
Yeah, Toyota are funding one of the moon cars that's going to be on the moon base.
For God's sakes.
It's going to have a big Toyota sign on it, for fuck's sake. So yeah,
you get fucking ads on the moon. You look up and there's going to be a big Sprite symbol fucking looking down at you,
shining down.
Amazon, AWS services.
So depressing to think about. To talk about one last part of all of this, if we're now taking what we're learning about the atomic bomb and the danger and the necessity and how everything about it, it really explains the current day. Because one of the things that's affecting everyone's lives right now, and it will continue to affect, in fact, in a year or two, it will affect so much more that we're going to be speaking about it probably every week, is AI and the effects AI has on humanity and society. And the only reason that we're in the position we're in right now with AI, with this complete lack of regulation, is because the Americans and the Chinese want to make sure, just like the Nazis and the Soviets and the Americans in the 1940s, that they get the benefits of the best AI before the competitor does. America has completely stopped any regulation on their AI ability, their ability to scale AI as much as they can, pump as much money into it as possible, despite the fact that over half of Americans believe that AI could threaten the future of humanity. 80% of Americans believe that AI is very concerning. And yet, and also as well, many AI experts believe that AI has a chance, this is between 10% to 90%, of ending humanity through extinction in the next few decades. And yet, even with all that expert thinking and all the people, exactly, the people in charge are making sure there's absolutely zero regulation, because just like the space race and just like the nuclear bomb, they are all making sure that they get there first. And it is really, really important for you to think about that when you're thinking about why the world is going in the way it's going. It's like everyone's racing towards a finish line because all they care about is making sure they survive over the next civilization. So right now, China and the USA are full steam ahead. They're trying to improve their AI to find the next edge on their enemy, and us as citizens of the world will just have to sit back and witness in horror as these nations play with our future, because they can't risk the other primate civilization reaching fire first. That's the kind of situation that we're in right now, and it's so reminiscent to what I'm going to be talking about in this podcast about the atomic bomb, because it is literally just America have got there first. Do they use it? We have to use it, because we need to show that we've got there first. We need to prove that we're the big ones. So we reached the point where 61-year-old Harry Truman has at his disposal a bomb so powerful that ethically it makes your stomach turn at the thought of deploying it, plus the major ramifications once it's actually unleashed onto the world, but also the potential major benefits of ending the war as soon as possible and saving hundreds of thousands of American lives who would potentially die trying to reach Tokyo. And finally, as well, ending the deadliest conflict in human history. So, Zach, what do you choose?
I said this before, and this is something I put a lot of thought into, even though I'm going to give my answer very quickly, but I used the bomb. Because I'm aware, given my episodes on Iwo Jima and my knowledge about the Battle of Okinawa, that it's like the philosophical question of like, would you rather let 10 people die than 100 people? This is the equivalent situation of that. Would you rather vaporize 2 cities, which it comes to about 130,000 people, or would you rather have a war that results in millions of civilians and millions of combat personnel dead? It will literally be in the millions if the US invade the home islands, and the war crimes and the suffering that goes along with that, the long-term ramifications of that sort of invasion. I think it's a clear, obvious, yes, you use the bombs to me, but that spawns like an ethical debate about
clear and obvious.
I think, yeah, VAR would not intervene.
Yeah, I actually wasn't going VAR with it, but yeah, good spot. No, so you genuinely think that it's not even. So, but is it worthy of a debate in your eyes?
Yeah, it's a philosophical debate, isn't it? Because it's too systematic, it's too brutal. The philosophical debate, I think, comes from the fact, like, should someone wield that sort of power? Is that power safe for humanity? Is it moral to be in possession? And that's why you get, like, proliferation treaties later down the line in the 90s and the 80s after the Cold War's over and stuff like that. That's where the philosophy comes from. It's like, should this awesome concentration of firepower exist in the world and belong to 9 countries, I think, have nuclear weapons right now? Right. Should they have that power? Probably not, no. But did it prevent catastrophe and far worse atrocities in that specific situation, in the invasion of the Japanese homeland? I would have said yes. So, like, yeah. I guess if I'm saying no, do nuclear weapons still exist?
Well, I think they probably would, yeah. That's kind of the point. That's kind of the point of what I've just said earlier, and it's also the point that Einstein makes, is if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. We can't escape it. It's going to happen eventually. And if it's going to happen, then we want to make sure we're the ones that have it first.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going to end part 1. Right as Truman is about to make the decision, right as the Enola Gay is about to be taken to Tinian Island, and the very first atomic weapon is going to be put on the Enola Gay and transported to Japan. In part 2, we will discuss, obviously, the actual bombings themselves, minute by minute, including, and this is quite crazy, the incredible decision to last second change the destination of one of the bombs. We're going to discuss all of that in the very next part, which will be coming obviously out next Thursday, only 1 week to wait until you can listen to part 2. So until then, enjoy, and we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Sayonara.